Hi, everyone. You know what you guys are? You guys are the truly dedicated S3 users because you are the last session before the party. So raise your hand if this is the only S3 session you've attended today. Okay. So that's actually very fun for me because that means that you haven't heard some of the things that I'm going to talk about when I go through the State of the Union for Amazon S3 and Glacier. So let me introduce myself. My name's Mai-Lan Bukovic. I'm the general manager for Amazon S3. I run engineering, operations, and product management for Amazon S3. And I'm here today to talk to you about Amazon S3, and I'm going to start from when it all started. It all started in 2006. So I have a few trivia points to give. Italy won the World Cup. Anyone Italian in the audience? Okay, it was the last time Italy won the World Cup. So, very noteworthy. The second point, it was evidence of water found on a Saturn moon. So those of you who are interested in planetary exploration, it's a milestone. And then Amazon S3 launched. Now, what's interesting about Amazon S3 is that we launched in 2006, but we launched with a lot of knowledge that we had built up within Amazon, the retail website, around object storage. So if you think about Amazon retail website, there's a lot of objects to store. There's catalogs, there's all kinds of photos, there's line items for objects that, for items that you buy on Amazon. So we had a team that knew a lot about object storage, and we had a team that knew a lot about object storage at scale. And that is what Amazon S3 is all about. So if you go back to that 2006 timeframe, when Amazon S3 launched, we started with the fundamentals. And I will tell you, I will talk about these fundamentals for the entire time that we're here together, because these are the things that we truly, deeply believe that you, our customers, care about too. So, durability, designed for 11 nines. Availability, designed for 4 nines. Security, we think about this all the time, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the evolution there and features and capabilities that we have. Performance, this is something we obsess about. One of the things that we have is millions of TPS on our S3 endpoints, and our data transit in and out of S3 has increased 137% year over year. So clearly performance has got to be part of job one for us. And then finally, cost. So we bring to you a low cost, highly durable, highly available, highly secure and performant service. But that's not enough. That's something that we have as the bedrock, the foundation for our service. And on top of that, we really want to make it easier for you to work with that storage. And we do a lot of different things on top of that. We start first from these fundamentals, and we think about security. So when we launched in 2006, part of the layering that we did on top for security was adding server-side encryption. So we had customers who were using their own client-side encryption, but they were eating the CPU cost for the client encryption. They said, why don't you take care of that for us? So we introduced server-side encryption. And as more and more customers came to Amazon S3 from different industries, financial industries, enterprises, they said, you know, I don't want you to manage our keys. I want me to manage our keys. I have a whole system. I got my security guys, and they tell me nobody else is managing the keys but me. So those folks wanted to have client-provided keys that were used for encryption. And that's one of the features that we provided earlier this year, where a customer, a developer, can pass in a client key that they manage on their own side, on their own application, and they pass it on the put or the get of an object, and then we use that to encrypt and decrypt the object, and then we throw away the key. We don't keep it on Amazon S3. The other thing that you heard about 2 days ago is a continued step down that line of greater and greater control for security, which is integration with our new key management service. And the key management service is this new service for Amazon Web Services where you can use a managed service to manage keys and get all the deep security features and roadmap associated with an Amazon Web Service. We have integration with that for S3. So that's just an example of how we think about this, where we take the durability, the availability, the security, performance, and cost, and we layer on features on top of that that let you take advantage of your objects in a way that benefits your application some more. And I think one of the really interesting things that I'm going to cover a little bit more later is all the work that goes under the hood to deal with the scale. So scaling for Amazon S3 growth is like nothing I've ever worked on before. It's trillions of unique customer objects. We have customers, and I'll talk about a few cases later on in this talk. We have customers who have hundreds of petabytes on Amazon S3. We have customers where we have to build a service because we have customers who come to us and say, I want over an exabyte of storage. Okay? I had to learn what an exabyte was when I came to Amazon Web Services. I didn't even know what it was. So for those of you who haven't run into this unit of measure, it is 1,000 petabytes and it is 1,000,000 terabytes. And we have customers who ask for that. So imagine working on a distributed system where you have customers that have hundreds of petabytes and talk about over 1 exabyte of storage. And think about the engineering that goes into that, and think back to those fundamentals we talked about and how to maintain that on this incredibly quickly growing base of storage. And that is one of the reasons I love my job. One of the things that we announced today was event notifications. So raise your hand if you've heard either Werner talking about event notifications or this come up in some other talks. Okay, so most of you in the room have heard about this. If you haven't, this is something I strongly encourage you to walk out of the room, maybe after you go to the party, and try it. Because event notifications kind of changes the model of how you interact with your objects. So event notifications is the ability to trigger a notification upon a put or a copy of an object in your bucket. So what you can do is you can trigger an SNS topic. You can trigger, send a notification to a SQS queue, or you can invoke a Lambda function. So all three of these ways give you a bunch of different opportunities to interact with your own existing applications or use this Lambda functionality that we introduced today. And it's incredibly powerful. The most prosaic scenario or use case that almost anybody can use is logging. So you update an object, you add an object to a bucket, you can write to a log. You update an object to a bucket, you can kick off some file processing task that you want to do with your object. When you really sit down and you think about what your applications do today, and you think about the code you've written to allow for this type of functionality to happen, to integrate your object into other application workflows, it's actually kind of amazing. So my ask of all of you is, after the party, if you sit down and you just pull up the Amazon Web Services console, go to the S3 tab, you can actually try this. It's very easy to try. You can have a bucket, you can set up your target, which is the SNS topic or the queue or the Lambda function, and then you can upload an object to that bucket after setting permissions, and you can see it work. It's actually incredibly powerful, and I really encourage you to try it because I think this is going to transform how people think about S3 applications. The other thing that we introduced in this week, re:Invent, is this integration with Trent. Sorry, I keep on calling it the code name, with Key Management Service, which is this service for key management that AWS is offering for customers who want to ask AWS to go and provide additional security features like audit logging, for example, on people who use the keys to access different objects. These are two examples of new features that we're going down the path of trying to make it easier for you to get more out of the data that you store in Amazon S3. So I'm going to go back for a minute and talk about how we think about those fundamentals that I introduced at the start of this session. The first thing that I want to go back to is the customer promise that we have to you for 11 nines of durability and 4 nines of availability. So if I think about that growth that I talked about, and I think about those customers who ask for over an exabyte of storage, the reason they are asking for that is this. It's this customer promise, because it's something that we've held very true to over the years since 2006, and there's a lot of engineering that goes into that. We have a AWS leader who has this awesome quote, and if you haven't heard it, this one I'm going to introduce to you because I think it really captures Amazon Web Services, which is there is no compression algorithm for experience. And what he's saying is that you can design a web service, you can think about all the cases that you want to go and address, and you won't know. You won't know how that web service performs until you start putting unexpected scale on it. You start layering on, hundreds of thousands, then millions, then trillions of objects. Then you start to really know, what does it mean to run at the scale that Amazon S3 runs at? I'll give you an example. In a large-scale system, low probability events happen all the time. So the industry average for a disk failure is 4%. So since I started this conversation with you a few minutes ago, disks are failing. Disks are failing in my Amazon S3 fleet. So in order to run at that customer promise that I just talked about, our technology has to be able to identify failing or degraded disks. It has to be able to repair them, it has to be able to recover from them, and it has to be able to continually do the replication and the other operations that our distributed system does to maintain that customer promise. Another thing that we always think about, which is really much harder than you might imagine, is managing capacity. So think again about those hundreds of petabytes and those exabytes that customers are asking for. We have to manage the elasticity of the capacity for customers who are both small and big. And the way we do that is, again, technology. We build a lot of systems, probabilistic model forecasting. At our scale, if we want to pass back the cost savings that we do to you, we can't put big, fat buffers in our capacity. We can't think about running our fleet in a certain way. We have to be very systematic, and we have to write software to let us do that. So all of these things that I'm talking about, I can go on. I could probably spend 2 hours talking to you about the different things that we do to manage Amazon S3 at scale. But it all comes down to, we don't run into these problems unless we have the scale that you, our customers, put on us. And there's no substitute for that experience. So I just talked about a lot of different distributed systems that work together to get you that customer promise that we just talked about at the scale that we were just talking about. All of that, we want to be wholly hidden from you, because we want this word, simple, to be the experience that you have with S3. So every single time we sit down with the team and we think about the new features that we're offering, one of the questions that we ask ourselves is it simple? Are we complicating our API? This is our REST-based API. It's very simple. We have a few more API functions in this, but really it's just, at the end of the day, it's get, put, delete, and list. And when you add on new functionality, how do you make sure you keep the simplicity of S3? And that is one of the things that we really focus on. The other thing that we've been focusing on this year, and you'll see more of in the upcoming couple years, is we want to make it easier for you to manage this vast amount of data that you're putting on S3. And this is really interesting. Again, you don't have this problem unless you have a lot of data, right? But imagine you have a lot of data, you got to manage it. And we know, because we deal with a lot of data ourselves, that you never manage it manually. So what are we trying to do with data management in S3? We're trying to make it easier for you to manage the data that you put in S3 so that it's easy for you to put more data into S3, and you can take advantage of that, and you can integrate it into whatever workflow application that you have for working with that data. So as an example, Amazon Glacier is an archive service that we launched a couple years ago, and we have automatic data tiering from Amazon S3 to Glacier using something we call lifecycle management. And lifecycle management, at the end of the day, it's a rules engine. It's a rules engine for how you want to manage your data. So what you can do with lifecycle management is that you can set a rule that essentially deletes or cleans out objects at the end of the month. You can set a rule that says, I'm going to take all the former versions of my object and move it into Glacier. Earlier in the year, we introduced a new feature where we combined versioning with lifecycle management. So we released versioning a couple years ago, and customers liked it. It let them save different versions of their object. But they came back to us and they said, I'm kind of spending a little bit of money on this because I got different versions, I got paid for different versions, but they really wanted to keep those versions around because what happened if somebody accidentally deleted objects in a bucket? We don't, this could happen for all kinds of different reasons, but when it happens, customers were like, well, what am I going to do then? So they turn on versioning, but they don't like the cost. So one thing that we did is we integrated lifecycle management and versioning. So what you can do is you can only keep the last version of an object in your bucket. You can tier out. You can tier out either through deleting or you can tier out to Glacier other versions, minimizing the amount of money that you're going to spend for essentially keeping around what is a recycle bin, which is a good thing to have. I know I like it on my computer. So the other thing that we've done, and we spent a lot of time on this, and this is something we care a lot about, is we're putting finer and finer grain control over security for your objects. Now, we launched in 2006, and one of the first things that we added was something called a bucket policy, where you can apply a policy for access on individual buckets. And then after that, we integrated IAM role support. And after that, we added MFA, authentication, so multi-factor authentication. And we recommend people actually put multi-factor authentication on any delete operation on your bucket, just to provide that extra layer of security to make it a little bit harder for somebody to go in and accidentally delete. So we're going to continue to go down this path because we know now that we have all this different type of data in Amazon S3, customers want to apply different levels of security to it. So data management and giving customers the ability to do what they want with the data, to control access to it, to tier it out, to trigger new things like what we were introducing with Lambda, this is really important for Amazon S3. The other thing that's important for us is we want you to be able to use any building block in AWS with S3. And so we've already started down the path. You have a list up here of different AWS services that are pretty deeply integrated with Amazon S3. One that we hear a lot of interest from customers is EMR has an S3 connector, which makes it very easy to use S3 with EMR. Cost allocation tagging is another thing that customers like quite a bit because it lets you have detailed billing reports with S3. And then this week, we've introduced integration with Lambda for event notifications in Amazon S3, as well as the key management. And we feel like this is really important because if we look across all the data we have in Amazon S3, this is sort of the source of a lot of information. I'll talk a little bit about more use cases later, but some people call it the source of truth. Some people call it the starting point. But this is the data that customers want to push out to Redshift, or they want to push into an EMR cluster. This is really critical, a starting point building block for Amazon Web Services. So I've talked about Amazon S3 as a building block. And what I want to cover next is how different customers use Amazon S3 as a building block for different things. And before I go into this, all the customers I'm going to talk about are external customers. But I want you to know part of the reason why Amazon Web Services moves as fast as it does is because of Amazon S3. So when I was talking about those customers that have hundreds of petabytes and exabyte, I was talking about external customers. I was talking about customers who are not Amazon or Amazon Web Services. I exclude those. Those customers are actually very big too. And if you think about Redshift, if you think about Aurora, the new option that the new service that we announced here, both of those services store their backups in Amazon S3, and they do it because of the fundamentals, the durability, the security, the availability. EBS stores all the snapshots for EBS, which you know is a pretty big service, in Amazon S3. And those are not what I include in the trillions and the hundreds of petabytes and the exabytes that I'm talking about. So when I talk about these different use cases, these are external customers, and I'm not including our internal customers who do much of the same thing. So we're going to start with source of truth for big data. The example we have here is Netflix. So Netflix uses S3, and they use it for Hadoop-based big data. They use EMR, so they use S3, EMR together, and they decided to go with an EMR S3 combination because they wanted some of the functionality and the features of S3. Specifically versioning to protect against the accidental deletes that I've talked about earlier, and they wanted the scale. They wanted the durability, and they wanted the scale. So for a lot of our customers that we see, a lot of them start with this idea of a big data scenario, and they use S3 as essentially the source of truth for that big data. And the way we usually think about it is, you put all your data into S3, you suck it all out, you do your analytics, and then you put, say, the number 7, right, back into storage, and you're using the same very simple storage interface for both of those operations. Another common scenario, in fact, a lot of enterprises start with this, is secondary backup. So in this case, you have NASDAQ, who uses their market replay, which is the historical stock quote application that they offer, and they use a combination of both S3 and Glacier. So they'll keep their storage in S3 for 90 days, and then after that, they'll tear off to Glacier, and they'll use it as a way to control costs. The integration they have for their on-premise site here is with the Riverbed as a backup gateway, and the primary reason why they chose S3 for this is really around performance and cost, because they wanted all of the secondary backup to be as cost sensitive as they could make it, because it was a secondary copy, and they wanted the functionality that Amazon S3 offers to be able to tier that out into Glacier. Another example, something that we see quite a bit, is for the PBS content. And so PBS, you guys are all fairly familiar with PBS, I'm sure. They have a lot of very large video content, and when you have very large video content, you have to go and put it somewhere. So for PBS, one of the things that they were excited about was really the elasticity of Amazon S3, the ability for them to migrate all of their content. Now, they had an on-premise solution before, and what they found with the on-premise solution is that it wasn't scaling really well with the growth of the content that they had, these very large objects. And the second thing that they found is that when they were streaming their video, they weren't having the performance that they wanted. So the video was stopping and starting, and if you're PBS, that's not an acceptable quality of service. So they moved to a combination of Amazon S3 and CloudFront, and they migrated a very large amount of data into S3, and they serve it out through CloudFront. And they saw a pretty significant reduction in streaming errors, and they're able to deliver a pretty high volume of video per month and grow it. And they know if they grow it, they're not going to run into capacity issues or anything like that, because Amazon S3 thinks that's part of our core competency. Sometimes you have a company like Pinterest, and Pinterest is all in to S3 as storage. So I don't know if you know this, but everything that Pinterest stores is on S3. So all of the pins, there's billions of pins, is stored in S3. All of the logs for the pins is stored in S3. So everything Pinterest does, whether it is the application that they have for log diving, for their developers to go find out some operational detail of some thing with their application, is stored in S3. And everything that they do with the application, the main application of Pinterest, is stored in S3. So if you think about the growth of Pinterest, I don't actually have the numbers, but if you think about the adoption that Pinterest has had for its application, one of the things that they told us is that they use Amazon S3 because they know we're going to be able to handle that. So really, if you think about billions of pins all stored in S3 and the growth that Pinterest has had, we are the bedrock of storage foundation underneath that. All right, so I want to spend a little time on talking about what goes on behind the scenes. Okay? When I say behind the scenes, I mean, what does it mean to build and operate something as big and as durable and available as S3? So, if I think about what stays top of mind for us, I go back to those fundamentals. And since 2006, this has really been part of the DNA of S3. This idea of how do we build and architect for durability? How are we thinking about security? And the security features that we've talked about are just one facet of security. We have a whole set of other things that we do to secure our production environment and just make sure that we are the most hardened, secure fleet that we can have for your storage, for your objects. Cost is something that you guys probably know pretty well is a major priority for us. We continually look for ways to drive down cost. And this is actually, I would call one of the core competencies of Amazon S3. And this is just part of the DNA, not just of us, but of Amazon. We are a very good company at really addressing and driving down cost. And the reason we do it is to pass along to customers. I have to tell you, I've been at Amazon Web Services for 4 years now, and one of the most refreshing things that I have ever experienced is in my first couple months, having the conversation where my manager and my manager's manager, they were all asking me, like, when are you gonna drive down cost and pass that along to customers? There's a real culture here of giving back to customers because we really think that this is a top priority for you when you're operating at scale and putting all of your storage in S3. So availability takes constant engineering at our scale. We are pretty proud of delivering the customer promise that we have. We're in 9 regions, and we deliver a very high level of availability in all those regions because of the attention that we put into it from an architecture perspective. Performance is an area that we continue to work on too. If I think about the transaction load, it's multiple millions of transactions per second on our endpoint. And it is actually one of the reasons why our big customers like Netflix have moved to us is because of the performance and the ability to scale. And then simplicity. We want to make sure that every developer who looks at Amazon S3 is really working with a core set of simple concepts of buckets, permissions, and objects. And we don't overcomplicate that experience of getting data in and pulling data out of Amazon S3. All right, another question that we get quite a bit is, so how do you handle such rapid growth? If you have customers, and we have a fair amount of customers, how do you handle the growth of the customers and also the growth of the storage on Amazon S3? And this is actually really interesting. So, raise your hand if you have one workload on Amazon S3 right now. Just one. Okay, a few folks. Raise your hand if you have more than one on Amazon S3. Okay, so a few people raised their hand with one workload, and a lot more people raised their hand with more than one. And the way that people usually start is they usually start with just one workload. And a lot of times it's secondary backup, sometimes it's the big data analysis example that we talked about earlier, and they get familiar with it, and they get used to it, and then they start to add more and more workloads. So what's really interesting about the growth of Amazon S3 is that we get a lot of new customers, but boy, we get a ton of existing customers who have had a great experience with S3, and they just start putting more and more data into S3. So if you think about those drivers of growth, and you think about how are you going to handle that surface area, again, 11 regions, huge service, rapidly growing, very strong belief in those customer promises and the fundamentals. How do you handle that growth? And the way we do it is essentially saying, you know what? We're not going to do this manually. Everything is going to be done through automation and mechanisms, okay? So I'm the general manager for S3, and I look at a graph probably in almost every meeting that I'm in. So if I'm looking at capacity, if I'm looking at performance, if I'm looking at a feature, I'm going to be asking for data, or we're going to be looking at a graph together. And that graph is going to be a real-time graph that's showing the operational experience, which at the end of the day is your experience, it's your customer experience. And we are going to be making decisions and understanding what we need to do next based on that real-time data. And that concept of making decisions on data is part of the DNA of Amazon S3 and really of Amazon as a whole. So the way we deal with rapid growth is that we put these things, these mechanisms like real-time graphs in place. We make sure that when we release a new feature that we have metrics. So I'll give you an example. Event notifications, very big deal for us. Changes a lot of the programming model for Amazon S3. And one of the things that we think about is, what about the response time, right? So how do we build something like event notifications and make sure that we keep a certain purity about the request path, which is the path for putting data in and getting data out, and how do we keep that without any kind of a performance impact. And the way we do it is we treat it as an asynchronous operation. So that you know that when you're using event notifications, you are not adding any performance tax on top of your put operation. Okay? So that's an example of how we use the data and the metrics to help drive our decision making in event notifications. Another thing that we thought about is, what about the availability of event notifications? So if you're going to build your application using event notifications, how do you know that you're going to get a notification? And so one of the things that we did is we set the design goal for 11 nines or 9 nines of availability on the event notification itself. So every single time we think about making a decision about a feature, about what we're going to do operationally, about changing the architecture of S3, which we do on a fairly regular basis to deal with our scale, we are always looking at a graph. We're thinking about a metric. We're going back to those fundamentals, and we're trying to really drive a consistent, automated way to deal with the growth and deliver you the quality of service that you expect from S3. So a lot of folks ask us, what are you thinking about next? And you know, for us, it always comes back to you. It always comes back to customers. So when we come to reInvent, we're super excited about any reInvent, because when we come to reInvent, we get to talk to you. And you get to tell us what you want. And we hear a lot of feedback from you, and a lot of the feedback goes into what we actually release. So event notifications, we heard from you. That was your idea. You said, hey, you know, I want to get rid of a lot of this code that I'm writing, to go listen for what's happening in my bucket, and then go do some activity or some action based on that. And I'm writing a lot of code that does that today. I want you to do that, because you're a building block, and I want more building blocks so I don't have to write as much code. And that is feedback that we took, and we worked on, and we built, and we launched event notifications. So for us, when we think about what we're thinking about next, that's really driven by you. And what's really interesting about being in the business of Amazon S3 is there's a lot of yous. And you are working in a lot of different industries. We have finance, we have federal, we have startups, we have all these different categories of users. And you guys give us great ideas. So when we think about what we're doing next, what we're looking for is you to give us that feedback and to tell us what you want and how you can take advantage of S3 and object storage in different ways than you've done before. And one of the most exciting things for me is, not today, but the day before, I spent a lot of time with customers and hearing the new workloads that they were planning to bring to S3. That was super exciting, because one of the things that we're looking for is that degree of confidence that customers get when they move to the cloud and they've been working with it, and then they're like, wow, this is really working for me. And then they start adding more and more. There's this light bulb that goes off, and they start to realize all the different things you can do. That is absolutely the case with Amazon S3, and we're excited about event notifications broadening that as well. Another area that we're very focused on is integration. So we hear this feedback from customers. They say, hey, I use EC2 and S3 together a lot. Hey, I want to use more of these sort of security features like IAM and now this key management service. I want to use that with S3. When you're S3, which is a major building block, there are a lot of different other AWS services that people want to put together with S3. And I showed you a list before. We do have some integration today. We have Glacier, import-export, storage gateway. We have cost allocation tagging. Now we have Lambda integration, so you can trigger, you can invoke a Lambda function. We have the key management service. We'll have more, because that's what we're hearing from customers like yourself, where they want to take these different building blocks and put them together for their applications. And then finally, scale. You don't work on S3 if you don't love this problem, right? This is the major thing that we engineer for. It's the bedrock, it's the foundation of everything that we do, and it's something that we know that you expect from us, is how do we constantly deliver the fundamentals that we talked about at the Amazon S3 scale. All right, so I wanted to close with that, say thank you for your time. I wanted to end a little bit early, so if you had any questions, you could ask me those questions. I am well aware that my session overlaps with, I think, the start of the party or some other event that's going on, happy hour. So feel free to ask questions for the last 10 minutes of the talk, and if you have a chance to fill out an evaluation and let us know how this session in general, the content went, we'd love to hear back from you. But let's open it up for questions. Yeah, question over here. So the question is, how does Storage Gateway fit in with Amazon S3? Storage Gateway is an Amazon Web Service that allows you to use a virtual appliance on-premise and send data into S3. We have multiple different ways to get data into S3. That's one of them. Import-export is another way to do it. And the way we look at it is we want to provide points of data ingress from AWS services and our partner ecosystem also. Mm-hmm. So the question is, how important is Gateway in the overall S3 portfolio? Again, when you're a platform as big as Amazon S3, all of the points of data ingress are important, right? So we look at Storage Gateway. We have customers who love using it because it meets the needs of what they have with their. Okay, I'm going to back away slowly. Thank you. So we have customers who like the Storage Gateway because it fits in well with their on-premise, off-premise architectures. So we're happy to have that data as a gateway. But we really look at a whole ecosystem, whether it's AWS-provided services or partner-provided services. We have a great partnership with Riverbed going on right now. We just see it as an ecosystem because we're a platform. Other questions? I think there were a few people who had their hands up. Yeah, go ahead. Can you come forward a little bit? I can't hear. Yeah, server-side encryption. Yeah, so the question is, I believe the question is, does server-side encryption work with key management service? Is that correct? Yes, it does. So now if you think about it, there are 4 different ways to do encryption with Amazon S3. When we launched in 2006, we had the way of a customer just doing their own encryption and then uploading essentially an encrypted blob to S3, which we stored for them. Then we layered on server-side encryption, which is where we do the encryption as part of the service and we maintain the key. We also have the client-provided encryption. Client-provided keys that we use for encryption, where somebody passes in their keys and then we use it to encrypt. And now we have this integration, which you can see in the console. It's a really quick thing to check out. We have console API CLI support for it, and it allows you to use this web service to manage keys.
So in the same manner that KMS can be used for client-side encryption as well, right?
That's right.
Okay.
Well, yes, it is a service. It would be the client in this case, right? So you would keep your keys in key management service, and then just tell S3 essentially to use your keys. You'd have to set a series of permissions on that, and then we would always use the keys that are stored in key management service with encryption operations for your objects in the S3 bucket.
So my question was more of like, if I manage my encryption on the client side, just that I use KMS service to store my keys. So that is also possible, right?
Yes, you could do that. Other questions? Yeah. Hi.
Here you are.
I'm kind of curious with respect to scale, like how fast are you adding storage to the S3 platform? Like petabytes a day, an hour, a month?
Well, that is, the question is, how fast are you adding storage to S3? And while I can't answer that question with specifics, I will tell you that we get a daily report when you work on the S3 team. You get a daily email report. That's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing.
So lots.
Lots and lots. It's very cool. It's very cool. And it's a fairly exponential growth, too, on a huge base. Other question? I think there's a question over here.
Is there a consideration for providing like a file system view of an S3 bucket with, for example, if you have workspaces, users, that you could, rather than have to create a file system that's separate, to actually view the bucket directly as a file system?
So you're asking if there's that capability in S3 today?
No, I know there's not that capability, but is there the consideration for that type?
It is something that we've heard
Or am
from
I the
customers.
first person that's ever asked?
No, you're not the first
Okay.
person. We've heard that from customers. And, again, it goes back to the simplicity of the model. People want to work with that. The file system semantics are also kind of interesting when you think about the big data scenarios as well. A lot of the Hadoop-style workloads have, a dependency or an expectation of file system semantics like that. So we do look at that. That is something that we think about.
Small company, half our users are going to be in workspaces, half will be back in the home office. All need to see Windows type file shares. And really not a cost-effective way to do that.
Yeah, thank you for your feedback. That's something we're considering. Other questions? All right, everyone. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.